We still could have a really good next 3 years of the relationship. But right now, it feels like the United States is purposely taking it in the wrong direction. And I'd say that's attributable really just to the U.S. president. I don't know that, Secretary Rubio or others would necessarily put it in that direction if they had a little bit more freedom and flexibility to operate on their own. So we need to change the direction and change the mindset by the president, I think, to be able to repair this. But I think it still is salvageable.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on Strat News Global. I am Surya Gangadharan. My guest is Richard Rossow of the Center for Strategic and International Relations in the US, International Studies in the US. He's a specialist on India, having studied the Indian economy closely, and we thought this is an ideal person to talk to about the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on India and the resultant tensions that have been generated. Richard Rossow, welcome. Glad to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me here.
How do you read the impact Trump's tariffs are having on India and the US?
Yeah, luckily, I would say kind of to set the scene a little bit, it's always good to remember that both of our economies are less driven by manufacturing than they are by services. In the United States, services makes up about 80% of GDP, and in India, that's right around 50%. And in India, too, where you got a vast majority of labor that's in agriculture. So the trade talks so far, when you think about manufactured goods, the ability to move product back and forth, relatively smallish part of our economies. But, for the United States is the part that we want to, begin trying to reemerge and see it grow again. And in India, which has never had, I think, that major moment of industrialization, hoping this Make in India campaign takes off and some of that agriculture labor that's moving to cities, that it can be absorbed into basic and low-skilled manufacturing, which is typically the development path really every other country has kind of went through. So while manufactured goods and trade in that may be relatively small for both of our countries, it's probably the area our administrations want to see grow the fastest. So now, from a U.S. viewpoint, India is not a huge market, although it's growing. But from the Indian vantage point, of course, the United States is a significant market, more than twice as much exports to the United States as the next largest market. So for India in particular, this could have a pretty significant impact in that area that the government wants to grow.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick word from you on how would you rate India's moves to reestablish manufacturing or the renewed push on manufacturing? Do you think we've got somewhere, or how would you rate it?
Yeah, so far the data shows that the Make in India program hasn't had a lot of significant success. When they announced it 11 years ago, manufacturing was about 14% of GDP, and at least per the World Bank, it's really kind of stuck at around that same level. So at least it's growing commensurate with GDP growth, but has not been growing faster than GDP generally has been growing. You've got, some suppliers to Apple that have made big announcements, and obviously that's caught a lot of attention. I would say, at the union level, most of the big reforms that you'd expect the union government to do, things like the goods and services tax and a lot of sectoral reforms, even shifting more recently to the production-linked incentive programs, that's useful and good. A lot of my work, you may know, Surya, is focused not so much even what's happening at the union level, but in states. And that's where I think for India, manufacturing to really take off, you've got to have more states that are really starting to pull at the oars and to help, because ultimately, trade agreement, fine, GST, okay. But if you've got reliable electric power grids, if you've got a vibrant supply of labor and flexibility, if you've got easy acquisition of land, add on top of that India's massive market size. And I think if more states start getting manufacturing regulations and policies in place, then I think the boom really begins to happen. So I think it's a lot more of an issue that has to happen at the state level at this point than the union level. But there's some areas the union government has talked about pretty actively that would still help, like this duty inversion, where a lot of times it's cheaper to bring in a finished good than it is to bring in the inputs. And so there's still some things certainly the union government can do to stoke manufacturing. But to me, a lot of the answers lie with India's states.
Would you say our moves to kick off manufacturing have been rather late in the day?
Yeah, you always wish, of course, great reforms happen sooner rather than later. And it comes in fits and starts. I remember After the Vajpayee government had that first year with the nuclear test and scaring companies away by talking about kicking out foreign companies, and then a bit chastened the next year with with losing the confidence motion, coming back and actually roaring with a number of significant reforms, opening the insurance sector, stoking the growth of IT services, building infrastructure. You saw the Manmohan Singh government, probably its biggest steps out it took was on significant strategic outreach to the United States and nuclear cooperation, things like that. And the Modi government, I would say the first term was pretty significant with a lot of foreign investment reforms and a lot of big reforms like GST and bankruptcy in the first term. A little bit less the second term, and frankly, we haven't seen quite the same level of energy and activity on reforms in the third term. So it comes in fits and starts, and I think the three prime ministers I've had the chance to work with closely, all had moments when they were really pressing the gas pedal on reforms, and had periods where it just wasn't prioritized. And I feel we're in one of those slow periods right now, and without Parliament functioning as well as it could because of all the overhang of which is much of what we're going to be talking about today. It's a tricky environment with the coalition and with Parliament not functioning as well as it could to get big things done.
So, given the impasse between India and the US, where do you see the options for India lie?
Yeah, there's really a couple of options. You hear a lot of folks in my universe opining about, is this the worst crisis, the nuclear test, or maybe 2013? And I'd say we still so far are not in what I would say an irreconcilable crisis, mostly because India so far has chosen not to fight back. India has certainly offered and articulated its own views, Ministry of External Affairs, in terms of how they view different steps taking place. Minister Piyush Goyal still talks about getting a trade agreement across the finish line. So I think where we're at today, India so far is still trying to pull out of the fire what it can and salvage the relationship by, seeing if there still is a chance to get a deal across the finish line. In which case, I think overall, the relationship improves quite a bit, not perfectly, but improves quite a bit. But you also see, even before the wobbliness in Washington, that India has been striking out in some new directions and cementing commercial relationships, deeper commercial relationship with a range of other partners. And this goes back really in the Modi government's second term, when you saw really an about face on how they treated trade policy. Modi's first term was very protectionist in nature, and that again was reflective of the fact that India has a massive trade deficit and was trying to stoke manufacturing. So protectionism was kind of the first instinct. But in the second term is when you began to see domestic support programs like the PLI programs. But more significantly, India began signing pretty robust trade agreements. UAE, Australia, the Swiss-led EFTA group, more recently with the UK and several other agreements that are under negotiation. So I think India realizes, at the end of the day, cementing market access and sometimes granting market access to others in areas that aren't politically explosive is a great way to make sure that you've got I would say multiple streams out there for Indian companies to connect with it and hook up with, because this over-reliance on the United States, when you've got dramatic shifts in U.S. policy right now, it's not healthy. All right, even if both economies are growing at relatively good clips and have a high degree of integration, businesses first and foremost they need stability, and right now U.S. policy does not provide that. So you've seen India already looking at other areas. So great if we can get the deal done. But I think India is thoughtfully building up commercial ties with a lot of other partners at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Would you say some of the strains visible now in the India-US relationship were visible in during the Trump's first term itself, and perhaps there's been a lack of application, or perhaps something that we didn't anticipate?
I think Trump's policy direction, you saw some early indications in the first term. So we shouldn't be terribly surprised by this attack on the world on tariffs. We saw some indications of that the first term, although not quite this robust. But specifically on the U.S.-India lane, I would say the difference is in Trump's first term, you saw attacks against India, but they were mostly things that really only the elites and national capitals care about. Calling Prime Minister Modi the tariff king and complaining about Harley-Davidson tariffs. That doesn't strike the homeland in India. And therefore, as long as Prime Minister Modi is willing to, kind of take a bit of a hit and move forward on the positive sides of the relationship, that was fine. This time, President Trump is going directly after things that are a little bit more politically sensitive. When you talk about open access and agriculture markets, I firmly understand most Indian farmers do not have a chance to get a potato they grow on an American plate. while any American farmer can get anything they grow on an Indian plate because of, the speed and efficiency of our supply chains and cold chain storage networks. So when we talk about opening this up, in India, you're not talking about a tiny slice of the population that's relatively robust and has other options. You're talking about half the population that's surviving on growing a decent harvest of potatoes. And so, when you talk about opening up market access in agriculture fully, I fully understand India has an extreme red line that can't be crossed no matter how much President Trump pushes. And second, with I would say the other area that you've seen a lot less political sensitivity by the U.S. administration has been about Pakistan. The way that President Trump characterized the two countries after the recent outbreak in fighting, the way that he probably mischaracterized his own role in negotiating a peaceful end to the dispute, and embracing General Munir multiple times since the outbreak of fighting. These are things that hit India and hit Modi at the political base, which weren't evident the first time that President Trump was around. So, yeah, you can look for points of aggravation in Trump's first term, but those were mostly, between the chattering classes and national capitals. Now President Trump is throwing things at India that hit the political base a little bit more, which creates a different level of danger and concern.
Tell me, do they see India really as a tariff king? I mean, we can be faulted for keeping very high duties on stuff that we don't have to. Is that the view there?
Yeah, I think, India broadly has a relatively protectionist regime. It's not just tariffs. I've seen Indian officials have talked about applied tariffs on things that India imports are a lot lower than the overall tariff rate. But it's not just about tariffs. India has been adopting price controls, mandatory local manufacturing rules, specific bans on import of different types of equipment, sometimes just from China, sometimes applied globally. And then more recently, quality control orders, which have also been a very serious form of non-tariff barriers. So it's not just about tariffs. When we say tariff king, sometimes it's the entire package. But again, I do understand it's reflective of the fact that, the United States has got concerns about imports, but our trade deficit to GDP is usually only about 2 or 3% of GDP. India's trade deficit to GDP is between 8 and 12%, depending on the year. So, the order of magnitude of concern about balance of trade with which India deals is levels beyond what the United States has. So, not to say anybody should have protectionism. And again, you've seen Modi in the second and third term begin to climb down from protectionism. The last couple of budgets, Minister Sitharaman usually reduces more tariffs than increases, and again, signing trade agreements. So you've seen India hit a bit of an inflection point a few years ago where domestic support programs, trying to reduce tariffs on capital goods and input goods. These are all very helpful and thoughtful things. Unfortunately, the United States still does not look at trade the same way. We think everything from mining the thing to producing the final good is what manufacturing is. And in part, as your government fully understands, you need to be part of a cog in the machine because manufacturing takes place across multiple jurisdictions to get one single thing produced.
So you would say that the US is no more to relent even with countries that are poorer than the US, per capita incomes are lower, general development indices are less. Those days are gone.
Well, and I think, there's a little bit of hope in what you saw with the joint statement that Prime Minister Modi and President Trump released when Prime Minister Modi came to Washington a few months ago, which is this kind of understanding that India, its progress probably lies more in labor-intensive industries, while the United States might have a little bit more of an advantage in relations between the two in capital-intensive industries. Totally makes sense. Most countries that have went through the development process India hopes to have really focused a lot of their time and effort on labor-intensive industries. But unfortunately, I would say even since Make in India was first announced, while you see a lot of different sectors included in that, most of the government attention has been focused on areas like semiconductors and telecom equipment and things like that, which don't produce a lot of jobs. If India is successful, it might help with India's trade balance because India imports a lot of electronics and equipment, but it won't really help with job creation. So I thought what you saw reflected in the joint statement makes a lot of sense. But again, getting that in a joint statement and a line, it sounds nice, but so far both countries seem to be prioritizing being great at everything at the same time. But for India, I think the better pathway for job creation at least lies in relatively dull industries like textiles, where India is not even competitive with your neighbor Bangladesh, in paper mills and basic chemicals. These are the sectors that a lot of times create a lot of jobs, along with improving balance of trade. And while they're kind of on the list of Make in India, they tend to be deprioritized, at least in negotiations with the United States, compared to the sexier high-tech industries.
You think a deal on Friday between Trump and Putin on Ukraine could, in that sense, lift the guillotine on the oil, Russian oil?
I think a warm conversation between the two would help quite a bit. But I think Trump's announcement last week on additional tariffs on India because of Russian oil buys, to me, I mean, the fact that India was singled out in the world. I know India is obviously a huge purchaser of Russian oil, but there are a lot of other significant purchasers. China, of course, being top of the list, and they weren't targeted. So to me, I think that was probably more of a negotiating ploy on the trade deal with the United States and India than it was a dramatic shift in U.S. Strategy and policy towards Russia. I don't think, I mean, if Zelensky's not at the table, I don't know how much the United States can actually negotiate with Putin over an outcome for Ukraine, because Ukrainian fighters may still want to keep up the fight. Europe has been stepping up in significant ways to supply military equipment when necessary. So I don't know how much can actually be achieved, both in terms of the U.S.-India lane, unless President Putin directly asks President Trump to ease pressure on India because they want to keep oil supplies going. Maybe India gets some relative benefit if the call goes well. But it feels to me like this may be more of a ploy on the U.S.-India trade deal than a shift in U.S. policy on Russia.
So then let me ask you, is there anything personal in this and what has gone wrong between Delhi and Washington?
It really is kind of hard to say. I think a lot of the people that are around President Trump, they treasure the relationship. We got a number of people that have a long history of engaging India pretty significant way, and they haven't looked at the relationship quite as narrowly as President Trump himself has looked at it. With the three big things: the trade agreement, Russia, and Pakistan. I would say, with the trade agreement, it may simply be that some agriculture lobby has managed to get in the president's ear and saying that access an area like soy or something like that is vital for their industry and for growth. And he's kind of taken that on. And as we saw last time he was in office with Harley Davidson, sometimes something just gets under his skin and he can't let it go. So, it could be something as narrow and simple as that. With Pakistan, there's a lot of things. Is there some strategic overlay, as we thought there might be a dramatic escalation in fighting with Iran or this crypto deal? A lot could be tied in with that, or maybe there's another quiet push that's being done on the war on terror. And Pakistan, on good days, has actually had some utility in the U.S. war on terror, although, of course, also hosting bin Laden next to military headquarters. So I fully understand it's not all roses and chocolates when we talk about that, but there's been times they've been supportive. And again, with Russia, I think that kind of holds itself in its own regard. It may be more the trade agreement. So there's a whole range of things, and I don't think anybody's got a perfect read on why President Trump has wanted to hold the line on a couple of narrow wins to get the trade agreement across the finish line, when to me it looks like the deal that we got ready to sign today is quite robust, and it's going to help a lot of U.S. companies and Indian companies really improve interoperability and grow our economies together.
I just want to make a reference to General Munir's remarks at a Pakistani diaspora event in the US. I mean, a lot of people here wonder how come he was able to talk so freely from a foreign soil, nuclear saber rattling and things like that. Is this being, what's the reading there?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly saw it. It was supposed to be an off-the-record conversation. And, from my interaction in the past with Pakistani military, when they're here, they do like kind of having a free-flowing conversation and a lot more open than a lot of times Indian officials are, mostly because they know that's what Americans love to see. They love people showing up and kind of talking American to us, trying to be frank and being very direct, which sometimes Indian officials aren't always quite the same extent. So, but again, I understand it was supposed to be an off-the-record conversation, but I'm pretty sure that leak would have been done purposefully by Pakistan because it plays to their interest to make it look like they're cementing the partnership with the United States and nuclear threats from the American soil. It's a bizarre spectacle, but Again, I think India is overreacting to some extent in the belief that Pakistan has dramatically gained traction in Washington, certainly with the president they have. But across the aisle, you look at the United States and the level of trade and investment we have with India. You look at the complexity of what we're willing to export to India, military-wise, space cooperation with the NISAR satellite going up in the air. You look at what's really happening on the ground today, the size of the trade relationship. Pakistan is a speck of dust compared to all the things we have in play right now with India. So I understand it's a pain point, and with Pakistan harassing India continuously with attacks more recently, it's something that Delhi pays attention to. But again, if you take a step back and look at the size and scale of the relationship across the board, it's a mouse to an elephant. So I'm not so concerned, but I do understand why India doesn't want to see Pakistan gaining so much traction.
Mm-hmm. We already have negotiated a fair amount of ground on this trade agreement. Do you think we have enough for an interim deal? And Trump, is he ready for something of this kind?
I think we do, but unfortunately, it appears the president does not, or at least his negotiating team feels that what they had teed up, because there was reports a month ago that they had a deal that was going to the president's desk for signature, and either the president glanced at it and said it wasn't enough, or the negotiating team, got cold feet and pulled it off the table. But suddenly back to more rounds of negotiations, and of course last week's announcement of 50% tariffs. So I would say overall, I would say the deal that at least has been, talked about in hushed whispers along corridors in Washington seems like a very, very good deal. Market access for American production, probably some announcements by India in terms of buying American hydrocarbons, maybe defense equipment. It feels pretty robust, and it feels like, for an interim deal, I hate calling it an interim deal too, because I think once we get this done and the threat of tariffs is off, I don't know how much momentum there's going to be to get future deeper versions of the agreement done. You've seen with India's other agreements with Australia and others that they were meant to be first round. It's taken years to get the rest of it done. I don't know that we'll go any faster. So I look at this deal writ by itself. Is it going to be good enough? In my estimation, absolutely. Sign the thing, get it done with, lash our economies together. Because when you think 30 years out, there's only 3 economies in the world that are going to matter. It's going to be the United States, India, and China. And if we can make that India-U.S. partnership as deep as we can, commercial integration, it's going to be inherently good for us and inherently good for the world.
So last question. Where do you see the India-US tie going forward? I mean, is it going forward? Is it now going to be stuck?
Yeah, so far, and I remember having this conversation a few years ago when India relations with Canada were really kind of dropping. It really was about a single person in Canada. India had no love and attention for Trudeau, and I'd say Trump himself is the one that's personally driving this car towards the cliff, and maybe, at least in his view, already over the cliff. So I think it's salvageable pretty quick if we have a, kind of a change in outlook. If we get the trade agreement done, we're obviously neither side's going to have an election anytime soon. But if you get the trade agreement done, I think we can begin repairing things. Military cooperation, interoperability. I mean, our shared concern about the rise of China is still very much on the table. Our IT services markets are deeply integrated. India is the source of tech workers, investment going in both directions. In fact, just noticed that the U.S. Census just put out the latest trade numbers. Trade is up by over 11% in real terms, goods trade in the last 12 months. So, in the real world, there's still a lot of great things happening. But the trade agreement, the love affair with Pakistan, the other one that we haven't talked about that has me very concerned is the steep drop. Some early reports of the steep drop in Indian students coming and studying in the United States. I mean, it's great. Like for somebody like me that travels across India and goes to state capitals and has a lot of programs with state governments, you walk in a state government, it might be in Bhubaneswar, it might be in Bhopal, and you run across officials that have key responsibility to study in the United States. I mean, that warms up the room immediately to try to think about big things. We can talk the same language. So if you see the steep drop in Indian students coming here, and if President Trump takes steps, as sometimes is rumored on tech workers and such, that would be damaging as well. So I'd say we still could repair this. We still could have a really good next 3 years of the relationship. But right now, it feels like the United States is purposely taking it in the wrong direction. And I'd say that's attributable really just to the U.S. president. I don't know that, Secretary Rubio or others would necessarily put it in that direction if they had a little bit more freedom and flexibility to operate on their own. So we need to change the direction and change the mindset by the president, I think, to be able to repair this. But I think it still is salvageable.
Just a final question before we wrap.
Yeah.
There is a view that there are not enough people in the current administration who know or understand India. And that's probably why things are kind of gone off the rails.
Yeah, well, I mean, we still don't have a confirmed Assistant Secretary of State, which we didn't have one at all during the entire 4 years. But Dr. Paul Kapoor, who's got great experience in the region, at least at his first confirmation hearing, we don't have even a candidate to be ambassador to India. And
Yeah.
some of the really long-time India hands that we had at the State Department have been nudged out as part of these expulsions of people that worked in the wrong offices or worked on the wrong issues. So yeah, we are a little bit lighter than normal in terms of having that real kind of India depth. But you also think about previous administrations. When Russia invaded Ukraine and India, had relatively benign position. When this concerns about India targeting people around the world with some of these hit campaigns. Like there's moments like that when you had a small number of senior people in the U.S. administration that said the relationships, long-term prospects are too important to threaten, that held the line. And even at that senior global role right now, you don't really have the folks that I think are willing to weigh in time and again and make sure that the boat remains stable. So yeah, we definitely could use a few more folks of that stature holding the right positions, and hopefully that'll happen before too long.
So there is still hope.
I've always got hope until hope is dashed. But, again, when you think about the massive weight and all the good things that are happening, even outside the president's purview, companies are still deciding India is a big market. Indian companies are still deciding the United States is the important market. So, this is an issue with the White House, but you've got a million other actors in the United States and India that are still trying to do good things every single day. And that's where I think my hope lies.
On that hope, Richard Rossow, great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers.
That's all I have for you on this broadcast. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.